and I'm talking today about creating characters. And the most important thing I want to share, I guess, is that, writing your first book, you have this cast, and, they're all clearly defined. And then when I went to write my second book, I really got scared because I thought, how are those people not going to sound like those people? So what I thought I'd do is just share with you some things I learned along the way, and some things to maybe just keep in mind when you are creating characters for your novels or your short stories. One of the things I had to do is let go of stereotypes and cliches, and really turn those inside out. It's easy to have the bad guy politician, or the bad guy reverend, or the good wife PTA soccer mom. Those are sort of the people that we can easily sometimes define. And I'm going to bring up this series that I know is not always met with favor, but Stephenie Meyers, who wrote Twilight, I think that's one of the reasons for the success of her novels, is she took a stereotype of vampires and turned it inside out. Instead of vampires being these blood-sucking people, they honored, human life, and they fed on animals, and they lived in a family, with a mom and dad figure and siblings. And so that was something that really took people by surprise. So I think one of the things that helps, in terms of creating your characters, is even if you get to that stereotype and you think, okay, this is going to be a politician who was on the take, well, maybe it's a female politician, or maybe it's a politician who is actually, donating money to a cause and gets in trouble. So that's, one thing to think about. The second thing is to be very careful when you are basing characters on real people, or you're liable to be sued for libel. There is a story about a woman who wrote a novel, and she created this character who was very much like her ex-husband, and all she did was change his profession. Well, that wasn't enough, and I think he successfully sued her for that. So you really need, and again, in writing my first novel, I did use, compilations of people, but, our experiences are who we are, and so sometimes we just, put things on the page and don't realize that, oh, maybe that sounds a little too much like, interestingly enough, those people don't recognize themselves, so I don't know. What's up with that? And then you can always, threaten people. Like I tell my friends, if they're not nice to me, they're going to be like rabid dogs in my next novel. So, but just, to be careful. Another thing I think is important in creating characters is give your characters quirks. Something that makes that character different. Maybe it's somebody who, tugs on his ear all the time, or somebody, like in Broken Glass, the character Leah scratches her hand every time she's nervous. And it could be somebody who has to, on the verge of OCD, maybe check the door lock 3 times. And that helps, too, your readers, in identifying with these characters. But on the other side of that, you don't want to make the quirk such that it makes the character too weird, unless you're going, for an absolutely weird character. Oh, and I forgot to mention this first. Keep track of your characters, because in Broken Glass, and again, it was my first novel, what did I know? I didn't even know it was going to be a novel, so I wasn't really paying attention to things. But I learned with Edge of Grace, like I had to write Karen, brown hair, green eyes, because by page 102, she might have had black hair. You forget, what physical qualities you give these characters when you're, way into the book. So it helps to keep a master list of what these people look like. In fact, even where the characters live, it helps. And I know people who cut pictures out of magazines, or else, use online pictures if they're just writing online, to get an idea, planted in their brains of what these particular characters might look like. And oftentimes, even, my editor, when they're ready to publish the book, they send me this sheet, and one of the questions on there is send us the pictures of 3 different people who you think your character would look like. And so for the male and the female leads, and even the children, I have to do that. So that's probably not a bad thing to do. Again, when I wrote Broken Glass, the husband in that novel is somebody that my early readers hoped I would kill. They read the book and said, "Oh, we really hope this guy dies." And someone told me that you even have to give the bad guy some redeeming quality, even if it's just one small thing. Maybe it's the bank robber who stops to move the turtle off the road, when he's escaping. But, we're not all bad, just like we're not all good. So, giving that bank robber or that person, humanizes him to the point, or her, where she's not one of those stereotypes. Names. Again, another thing I found out in writing is you have to, here's what I do. I take a sheet of paper, like a legal sheet of paper, and I write out the alphabet A through Z. Then I write all my names, my character names. And I try to pick a different letter of the alphabet for each name, because otherwise you end up with like Nat and Ned, and then your readers have a hard time distinguishing one character from another. Or, sometimes I'll have Elizabeth and Leah, but then everybody calls Elizabeth Lizzie, so then and so it helps for the readers to keep those characters straight. I've used baby name books to come up with character names. That's always a great source. And you can get this online. You don't even need to get the book. And you can even look up popular names for certain years. So when I was writing Love Finds You in New Orleans, which took place in the 1840s, nobody was named Katie. I had to find names that were historically accurate for that period of time, and you can actually find that on Google. There's lots. Wow. Yeah, it's amazing. You can even find, like, there's Social Security records of the top 10 popular names in certain years, and last names are sometimes a problem, because I know for me, I tend to rely on Smith, Jones, Johnson, just because they're easier. But I think that's one of those things I'm learning to branch out, because there might be a Hispanic character in my book, and they might not have the last name of Smith. So to be aware that even the last names need to mirror your characters. In moments of desperation, I've opened magazines and gone down the list of like writers' names, their last names, just because you get sort of brain dead after a while. I don't know what it is, but those names, I can't write a book until I know what my characters are named, because I think their names are so much a part of who they are. And I think part of this comes from teaching too, that I will hear a name and I have a certain association with it, sometimes not always positive, and I'll think, I'm not naming that character that. But in Edge of Grace, I had no idea who this woman was going to be or what she was going to be named. And so I called her Karen, but she was kind of different, and so I didn't want her to be the K-A-R-E-N, and so I ended up doing C-A-R-Y-N, because it just seemed to fit her personality. Because Karen, to me, K-A-R-E-N, seemed more old-fashioned. And in fact, I don't even think I teach a Karen. I don't think I've taught a Karen in years, or a Janet. I don't teach those either. It's funny how names, come around. So that might be something to consider too, is really pay attention to your characters' names, because I do think that readers make associations with names, and I think we do too. And once we find those names, I think that helps us form who that character is and how that character will look and act. We talked about pictures. when I think in Broken Glass, I had Leah and Carl. And going back to that name thing again, I picked Carl because it was a very hard and harsh sounding name, because he was a hard and harsh person. And so that was one of the things that I used. But they lived in an upper class neighborhood. They were affluent. I had to look through magazines and find pictures of the kinds of houses or different houses that I thought they would live in. Well, another thing I learned is once you find the house, you need to cut it out and keep it, because you don't remember if they had a fireplace. She sat by the fireplace, and then, page 200, there's no fireplace. So find, settings that work with your characters, and that's another thing to keep track of because it's easy to forget. Also, how they dress. Leah was very upscale. I know nothing about upscale. I shop at Target's, and so, that's the extent of my upscale. I have a daughter who, I don't know where she came from, but she knows every designer, everything, and I would call her and I'd say, okay, I need this kind of dress, these kind of shoes, this kind of jewelry, and she's like, rattling off all these names. Like, well, she would wear David Yurman jewelry, and probably, okay, I think she might wear Jimmy Choo shoes, but maybe not. Maybe she. I'm like, okay, whatever you say, But again, that's one of those things that, you have to get specific with these characters and can't, say she wore very expensive suits. I wanted to have a name of very expensive suits, and I can look online, but even, I don't know if that's very expensive that nobody wears, So it helps to even keep that along with your characters. What would these characters wear?